Okay, hi everybody. Once again, this is podcast discussion group 3 for week 5, education options and globalization. The first question, other than public schools, what are some other school options for parents? Discuss advantages and disadvantages of these options.
Should we all just kind of go through and maybe talk about one and then we can discuss
Sure.
after that?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, I can start. Um, I broke it down into a couple, but I'll do Catholic schools. So for some of the advantages I said there was if you have a Catholic background, it's a religious education, which may be more beneficial for parents and they might feel a little more trustworthy sending them to a Catholic school. Academic standards are typically held higher than in public schools. Community is big within Catholic schools, just from like personal experience. I know in my Catholic school, we were having community events at least once or twice a week, even on the weekends, just whether it be alumni events or like actual family events for families to come. Um, I said they have smaller class sizes and it's usually a more disciplined environment. And then for disadvantages, I said the cost, because it can be very expensive. The religious requirements might not match families' religious requirements. The lack of diversity, um, limited access for those with disabilities, and also location of students, and then stricter rules and guidelines could be a disadvantage. But yeah, that's kind of what I had for Catholic schools.
Yeah, I mean, especially having my daughter attended Catholic school a couple years, and when you put a religious school versus another type of public or I'm sorry, private school, religious schools are much cheaper, which is you know, pretty attractive, um, for any family, on a budget. And in some of I remember even when I was in Catholic school, I had a Hindu classmate, so I think that on some level, you know, I mean, he was part of the community there too. His family was part of the community, and might not have been, participating as much in some of the more religious focused classes and school events, but I felt like, even in a pretty, religious Catholic school, they were open, to other cultures and faiths.
Nick, I was going to kind of say the same thing. Like I've taught in Catholic schools and I grew up in Catholic school. Went to a Catholic high school, the whole thing. Although what they charge for a Catholic high school now is a little outrageous, but that's neither here nor there. But I have to agree that they've kind of gotten a little lax on the Catholic requirement there. Again, like you said, they don't necessarily have to be a part of everything that they provide, like, church on Sundays, things like that. But I agree that they've gotten a little more lax than I'm sure than it originated. Like I had students in my class that weren't, that were Jewish or different kinds of religions. But no one treated them any differently. We kind of, followed the golden rule that can be found in the Bible and that whole thing. Like that was a big thing to apply to even in high school, like classmates, so on and so forth. And I think it was kind of nice because from friends that went to other Catholic schools, they didn't really have the same experience. So they kind of were just like, what? So it was kind of nice to be able to experience that in, like Peyton said, in a different environment that you kind of didn't really expect to, which is, and no parent can, no one left the school or anything like that. So everyone seemed very, I don't know, welcoming to all different kinds of classmates. I guess as long as you're, kind to your student or their child or whatnot, then they have no issue, which is nice to see.
Now, I know like in my Catholic school, there I had like friends that weren't Catholic, but we did like monthly masses and they still had to attend mass. So like thinking about like our previous readings and stuff, that's I feel like a big thing too is like in public schools where we talk about having those rights to be able to stand up for your religion and things like those kind of get taken away in that Catholic school if these students aren't Catholic and do have to sit through these masses that aren't their religion. Like, yes, they don't have to participate, but like they still have to be in the same room as their class.
True, but I think they chose to go to the school, so they, going into it, they know what to expect. At least they should know what to expect. I'm sure they explained that too. But I worked at a Christian school, private school, and it was K through 12, so we had all grade levels and stuff. But again, it was, not everybody was a Christian, but again, they had standards because they're the Christian standards, right? They use the Christian morality to, abide by, and they expect their students to behave like that in school, right? What they do out of school is a little different, right? But, that's what their standards were. Which I think religious schools, they do have that advantage in that they have like a set rule, like they have their standards, and like that's what they expect of everybody, and everybody knows it. Like that's what it is. Where in public school, each public school can be slightly different here or there. Even in the classrooms, they can have different kind of standards and stuff. Where if it's a religious, where they have a religion that has their structure already there, that it's kind of, I don't know, more known or more expected as well, where everybody's held to the same standard as well. So I think that's, well, it could be an advantage, could be a disadvantage, but I think it's just the way you look at it as well.
Yeah. I think we could, when you talk about, sort of whether or not you want to take part in religious activities or not, that kind of reminds, or is a good segue, I think, to go into talking about homeschooling as an option for families, as instead of public school. And because I know that a lot of families that choose homeschooling, they do so on, because of religious reasons. They want a lot more religion, or stuff like that. I know in my experience, I had a cousin that was a homeschooler, and that was her primary motivation for it. So I mean, the one video about homeschooling, and and it seemed like that, after looking into the speaker for that, it's possible that was a something that he considered. Also, he'd moved abroad, so that's another thing of how to decide what how you're going to educate your child when you're an expatriate, or you're just abroad for a period of time. So it seemed like he made some points about advantages being that it's technology driven, that it's very sort of tailored to the individual student, very individualized. And I would say, and he tried to address the thing that I think a lot of people would bring up as a con for homeschooling, which would be socialization. And he tried to say that there is a lot of socialization, but it comes down to mainly, socializing within your immediate family, which is not to say that that's not a really important thing, but it is an extra, it does seem to be a thing that families that do homeschooling have to really sort of coordinate with other families. And I know that there's sort of homeschooling collectives that they organize together to say, we're going to go on a field trip together, and stuff like that. But the fact of the matter is, there's not the same, it's not the same type of socialization that you're going to get from any other type of school.
And Nick, kind of like, I know we always use this phrase, but like piggybacking off of what you said, the first thing I thought of was, oh my gosh, online school, I guess. Like, oh my gosh, can't think of what they are. There's a word for them, but now, of course, I can't remember what they're called. Cyber school, that's what it is. There it is. That's exactly what I thought at first. And the first piece I thought of was like which is unfortunate, was the socialization piece. Like it has all the academics that are necessary, and it's more, I guess, fluid or flexible when it comes to when you can start, when you can stop, all of those things. So it's good for like students that struggle with certain, parts of socialization. That could be another thing too. But the idea that they're not even like exposed to it very much. Like you said, there can be virtual classes, like they have virtual meeting hours and things like that. But it's almost like this is a weird comparison, but like almost like holding a book. I know you can like read a book on like your Nook, but I don't know if anyone else is like me. I'm a little nerdy when it comes to like, I have to hold the book. There's something about holding you know what I mean? It's just like through a screen, it seems not as like genuine, I guess. But that's as soon as you said homeschool and like the technology driven but the lack of communication, the first thing that clicked in my mind was cyber school too.
Yeah.
Talking about socialization, so I think homeschooling and the cyber school are a little bit different in that socialization, where cyber school, I mean, the nothing beats like, yeah, we're talking to each other right now on, Google Meets or whatever through the screen, but it's still different than being right next to somebody, which I think that people in cyber school lose that. Yeah, I mean, again, like you're saying, they interact with their immediate family, the ones that they live with, but interacting through a screen is completely different than interacting with somebody in person. I used to think like too, like over the phone, like you can yell at somebody over the phone because you're not looking at them, you can get as angry as you want, but when you're in front of them, it's way different. It's harder to yell at somebody when they're in their face because, you have more empathy looking at somebody and especially being in proximity of them. Especially seeing mannerisms. Like I talk with my hands a lot, right? And so like seeing that is different as well. Your facial expressions, like it's a lot, very different where through a screen, on the phone, through text messages, through emails, whatever it is, they're all very different. And I think, but it's important to be face to face with somebody at least once in a while and stuff.
And I think
but homeschooling. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I cut you off. I'm sorry.
I don't want to jump from. No, you go because I don't want to. I was jumping to a whole new thing.
No. I mean, but that it's we kind of learned that through COVID, right? That's kind of what I was thinking firsthand. Was like all these kids. Well, and at least again in my experience, is like you can tell the difference between those that like the littles, like they're kind of like well, like they didn't really start school that way, so they just walk into this room all of a sudden. They're like, whoa, and like who are all these children? And the social anxiety gets to them, and then their academics are off, and all of those things. And I think, coming from a teacher's perspective, getting the material across, like I tried teaching through a screen and I was like, ooh, are they getting it? I can't really, so that's one thing I thought of, Nick, when you said that was like, just there's a difference and it's important to learn, especially so young and in something that means so much like your academics. One thing to like FaceTime your friend, but like academically, like there's so much can be, there's so much disconnect that can occur there. Like, are you sure you want, like, I don't know, manipulatives? Like there's no way for me to really check for understanding. And it was a challenge, and the kids struggled emotionally because they lost time with their friends too. So.
Now, I'm not sure if you guys so I coach softball and I have 2 girls on my team who are homeschooled. And the difference in behavior between them and the children that go to school all day and come to practice is like I would be looking at a high schooler versus like their actual grade level. Like they are so mature. They aren't full of energy. Like their ADHD medicine's like working and they're not going bonkers. And it's just like they're able to participate and be fully engaged. Whereas my students who are my girls that are in school all day are the ones that are like all over the place, can't sit still, can't pay attention, can't keep their focus. And it's like, I always wondered if there was something that like maybe just being around the homeschool environment and not around all these crazy kids all day, like helps their maturity level, or if the mother is just really that involved in homeschooling her children that she just sets very high standards and values for them. Like I always wondered if there was a correlation between like having so much energy from coming from school, because I've read some studies that like 8 hours in a classroom for kids isn't really ideal. So like, is there a correlation there?
I wonder if it's
Peyton, first thing I thought, go ahead,
I can
Nick.
only imagine that like that a parent that would choose homeschooling would be, I don't know, it wouldn't, I'd be very surprised if they were like a super easygoing, person. I bet that it's like they probably have a very strict household. So that probably has something to do with it. But I think you're probably right about having some outlet for the energy if it's better managed, in that type of environment. That's an interesting. I hadn't thought of that. That's interesting.
Peyton, I first thought that it would be the reverse, quite honestly. Like, my last period students are like, they're done and I'm done. I'm like, okay, we're all done. Let's just all take a nap. No, but I would think because they didn't have so much socialization, like these kids, I would think they would be overstimulated, from the whole day, and they're just kind of like dragging their way through practice or a game or what have you. Whereas the homeschool students would be like, hey guys, oh my gosh, guess what? Blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? Because they didn't have that social interaction where the other kids are like, don't talk to me. I've had enough. So that's interesting.
Yeah, it had me thinking this past week because I never realized that they were homeschooled, but I was like, I knew they didn't all go to the same school, but I didn't know if they went to like a private school or a Catholic school or just another school up there. And finally, one of the girls was like, Courtney, did you go to school today? And she was like, I'm homeschooled. And I was like, oh my God, like, I feel like I need to look into this and see if there's a correlation. Because my other ones are like the Energizer bunnies. And I'm like, how do you parents handle them when it's like not sports season and they come home from school like this?
So in addition to homeschooling, parochial school, there's also private school and charter school. But to talk about charter school is also kind of segueing into the second question. Do you think we could do that, or do you think we want to talk specifically about pros and cons of charters?
No, I think it connects perfectly. We can make the transition. I think
Okay.
so.
Yeah.
So the question 2 is, historically, charter schools have served primarily minority and low-income student populations. Have charter schools been effective? Are charter schools creating a new form of racial and economic segregation? Discuss. I don't have any firsthand experience with charter schools, so I really only know based off of other people that I know that do charter schools. And then, the research that we've done in this class, and honestly, that one video that that was assigned to us, it was really long, but it was also a really good discussion. And I feel like I got a lot more contact on everything through that. As far as like, I've seen that it does primarily serve minorities. Most of the my friends that that go to charter schools have that experience as well. And I know that my one friend in New York, his daughter was accepted into one of the more sort of elite high schools, which there's also a certain amount of racial demographic. No, I wouldn't say segregation, but it's just in terms of the population of the school tends to be mostly like highly Asian in the school that she was accepted into. And she's Asian and she was coming from a school that was primarily Black. So he was just like, well, she was one of the only Asians in her charter school up until this point, and now she would be there with mostly Asians. So it does seem like charter schools have that kind of thing. Although I don't know. It doesn't seem to me like it's a segregation thing.
I agree, Nick. I was thinking that language was a little heavy. I have experience with charter schools, and from my understanding with them is that they receive their funding from the public school system that they're like, say, so Philly would come from the Philly school district. And I would assume that because of that, they would have to not represent all different kinds of cultures and backgrounds and things to kind of keep their charters and whatnot. I would just think that it would be something that you would have to consider with like location, like where they're being built is one thing too. Like I don't see a lot. I mean, again, I've only had experience with like charter schools in the city or like the city area, like, suburbs around there. I haven't been anywhere like north to speak on this, but I haven't seen any charter schools. There seem to be more in the more diverse parts of the city in Philadelphia and Bucks County and all those areas, if any at all. So I think that's something to consider. But I also think, I mean, like I said, segregation seems heavy, but I would assume that because they have to keep their charter, and in order to stay open, they kind of have to make sure they're meeting certain criteria. And that I'm sure is, something that they have to make sure that they're doing, because that's why they were created in the first place, to kind of fill the gaps. At least that's what I've learned from the readings that we've been doing. So to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, that's probably what it seems like, but I don't think that's their intention.
Mm-hmm.
I think, well, charter schools, they're usually pretty small, right? They're not usually too big. So there's usually, a couple hundred, and that could be, K through 6. So it doesn't, who knows? So they're usually small, meaning smaller classrooms, but it's also, the area that they're put in. So if the area, like, I think this is kind of what you're saying, Sarah, if the area is mainly minority, then the charter school is going to be mainly minority.
Mm-hmm.
So like that public school could be the same demographics are still going to the charter school, but again, most of the charter schools seem to be located in urban areas, low income minority areas. So like that's what the charter schools are mainly going to be made out of. So when you see like compare like all of the public schools in the United States compared to all of the charter schools, it's going to look heavily favored, minority students toward charter, because that's where the community that they're in. So I don't think necessarily looking at those. There was one of the articles that I read where they compared charter schools to the area schools that they're around, and demographics look more similar than they did to the U.S. population in general. But there was one that was talking about Minnesota, and like one of them was centered around like African society, like that's what they taught. So it was more African Americans, more Black people, Black students there. So they focus on that? Sure, some of them, but I also think charters are hard to, I guess, research and gauge, just because they're all so different, right? The whole purpose of a charter school is to come up with something innovative and kind of, use that to see if it works, and then maybe spread throughout. So again, I think it's hard to, even compare one charter school to the next, because they have different goals, different visions, and all that kind of stuff. I went to a charter school when I was in middle school. So I lived in a, suburban town where the public schools are very good. And this charter school opened up in my town, but it was supposed to be half from my town and half from like the city next to me, who didn't have great public schools. And it was 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So it was middle school, and there was only like 30 kids in each grade. And this is like 99. So like, this is before computers are like, all the craze or whatever. But the whole purpose of it was there was more computers than there were students. So like, it was all technology based. Where, in elementary, I was in 5th grade. We had that one computer that we played Oregon Trail in, during recess, and that was it. So like, this is like, supposed to be innovative and get at the time. So like, they're supposed to be half from Fairfield, half from Bridgeport. And, I think it like a lot of the Bridgeport students wanted to come over, but the Fairfield, like we had a good public school. So it wasn't quite 50-50 when I first got there, but it was, close enough. And then as the year, like 6th grade, after when I went to 7th grade, then it was more Bridgeport, less Fairfield. And then when I was in 8th grade, it was even less Fairfield, more Bridgeport, just because I think, not that the charter school is doing too bad, but it was just, the Bridgeport students wanted to get in here to the charter school to leave their public schools, and our public schools were already good. So people weren't really like looking for something better. They had pretty good schools. So they didn't want to try anything else out. So I think that also comes into factors as well. Like if you're in a good in a good school district, you don't really need a charter school. You're not really looking for something else, because you already expect it good. Where a public school that might get bad grades and this and that, people are looking to get out. So I think that is also another term, even like where charter schools open. That's why they open mostly in, public school districts that are failing or doing poorly, because they're finding a need and they're filling that need. So,
and Nick, kind of like connect to what you were saying, is like, you have to apply, whereas like public and like, get accepted and all of those things. So who's to say that it might just not be well known to certain areas that may have less minority or less diversity and things like that. Whereas like we kind of connected about was like where they're built. It's like, oh, okay, there's that new charter school being built. I'm definitely going to be the first one on the list. Whereas like people who may live a little farther away, from different, backgrounds and whatnot, they might not know right away until they hear it from wherever, social media, what have you. So that's something to consider too. It might just be how many are applying comparatively, one versus the other, and first come, first serve, just a thought there.
Peyton, you're muted.
I'm muted.
Okay.
I didn't have much experience with like charter schools prior to this, but I found something that like there's been a lot of chances where these charter schools are outperforming the public school systems just based on the standards and values that they're teaching at the charter schools. So like I feel like, I don't know, maybe if they invested even more money into these charter schools to get them to not necessarily like, obviously public schools are so much bigger, so the standards are higher there, but like at least on a equal level playing field academically wise, like I feel like charter schools could become a hot commodity over public schools, especially with that like open curriculum.
I forgot which article it was, but it was talking about San Francisco, how they're kind of like fighting against the charter schools. Or I think any kind of threat to someone's money, which is kind of public schools, like when they lose the students, they lose the money that comes with them. So they're fighting back, especially with like it was more property values and all that in San Francisco, where charter schools can't even get a building. They can get the charter, but they can't get the building because it's too expensive to run. That properties are real expensive in San Francisco. So I think everybody's fighting back. And even the one that I looked up for the research paper coming up, they had their local school district, I don't know if they say sued them, but like they said no to their charter because of a couple of reasons that have already been fought in court, but they just did it to kind of try and get them out. You know what I mean? So I think they have a lot more barriers now, especially people fighting, So
yeah, one thing that I know, or that I remembered, I took a note on, because this is all about school choice, and it said the privilege is not having to choose. So it's kind of like what Nick was talking about with where the public schools were really good, so there was not as much incentive for people to want to go out of it. But I did think a lot about when they were saying like, oh, you're not tied to your zip code, where your address isn't going to be the reason that you attend your school's K through 12. And on some level, like it still is, like it is still a thing if you have the ability to get your kids to to a school that's not close to you, and I've known plenty of people that have lied about their zip code, and they go through all this stuff to get their to take their kids to school. And especially New York, where they have like it's all just one big school district in New York City. So Bronx, Brooklyn, Staten Island, Queens, Manhattan, and kids have to commute, like sometimes hours, for middle school. And I'm just like, I just don't, it's just about whether or not you can let that happen, so there is a certain, privilege barrier that comes along with a lot of these kind of school choice things. Like if you just can't afford the time, you can't homeschool. If you can't provide the access to getting to school, you can't send your kid to a school that's not the closest one to you. So in that way there is that kind of second generation segregation that's still happening, no matter what.
I think that's a great segue to, if I'm sorry, Nick, I don't want to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say that kind of idea of like, these children having to travel hours to get to school, and it's a matter of, having the choice, being able to choose and whatnot. I think that's a great connection to the globalization of the Western model of schooling increase. The last question, of course, does the globalization of the Western model of schooling increase social and economic inequalities and inequities? Discuss. So that's kind of like the first thing I thought of, was like transportation. You know what I mean? So, but I guess in connection to that, that's the whole idea of like, okay, if I can't get my kid into the school that I want them to go to, whether it be because of transportation or whatnot, does that mean that the charter school or the cyber school, is that making a equal level playing field now? Like, oh, well, if you can't send them here, you could always, here's like this cyber school for them, but then they miss out. So I guess it can go both ways. It really all depends on location, um, uh, the poverty level, and all of those things. Like when it comes to what if they don't have internet, they can't send their kid to cyber school because they don't have internet. Do they supply that for you? You know what I mean? So it's almost like a double-edged sword. No matter which way you spin it, it's just, it's, I don't want to say unfair, because that seems, it's not true, that they're trying to find something for everyone, but one size does not fit all either.
Right.
So
Yeah. I
it's
mean,
just,
I think that there is always that kind of competitive side, that goes into, oh, well, this school is ranked, is the number one school in the area. We're not zoned for it, but my brother lives there, and we can, just commute, and it just kind of brings it does bring schooling into this thing where it's like a job, and it's like, this is also, this is also supposed to be before all that stress and stuff happens in these kids' lives. I mean, I had friends that sent their kids to these like elite schools, and they would tell me, that they would get home from school at 4 and do homework until they ate dinner. They would eat dinner and then do homework until 1:30 in the morning every day, and I was like, that is so unfair to a kid. It's not supposed to be, you're not supposed to have that level of expectation on, you're not supposed to have that level of stress. And you do take away a child, the childhood. You take away the part of our life that we're supposed to have some kind of freedom and some kind of chance to just explore the things that are, that interest us without having to trade off.
yeah.
And just piggybacking off what you said, Sarah, because I highlighted a lot the expenses throughout the Western model and like how expensive it is and how like that inequality does get thrown in with the low income families and families that can't afford that like quality of education or that location of the house with a better school district or things like that. And I just feel like it all comes back down to money. And I feel like that's like everything in the public school system.
Oh yeah. Peyton, kind of what you were saying there too is like, at least in the Philly school district, I know that for a while, I'm not sure if they're still doing it now. I think they are though. They were like paying parents to drive their kids to school. I think that really had to do with more of like the lack of bus drivers and things like that. So they were trying to make sure that their kids don't have to learn hybrid anymore or virtually. Because then the teacher would have to make sure you're logged in as she's teaching, and then the kid misses class time. It didn't work for anyone. So that's kind of how they were trying to meet them where they were that way. But like you said, when it comes to the nicer school district and things like that, I don't think they do that. Location is all about, and the resources available. I don't know if the more suburban area school districts even have that part, allocated in their funding, because it's not something they have to really worry about either. But there might be parents that would appreciate that because they want their children to go to said school district or school or what have you. So that's something to consider, I guess.
When I looked at this question, I guess I kind of thought of more like not America, but other countries, like third world countries or countries that are coming up, just because it says globalization of the Western model. So I was kind of thinking of other countries. Um, does that I don't know if it's hard to tell just because I don't really know other countries what models they came from to then the Western model. So does it increase social and economic inequalities and inequities in other countries? Maybe, but sometimes I see quite where I see things where it says they're going to increase you know the disparities between certain groups. But I'm also like, if every group is going up and maybe just the top is going up a little faster, is that necessarily a bad thing? Because if everybody's going up, it's still good. Yes, the disparity might be growing. Like, I guess I kind of relate it to like wages, right? If wages go up, like if everybody's is going up, that's a good thing, right? But maybe the top end and maybe they're just getting a little bit more wealthy. But is it necessarily a bad thing if everybody is going up? So if everybody's education is going up, maybe it is getting a little bit more heavily favored towards the rich, people with more money because they live in better school districts or whatever. But even if the bottom is increasing as well, is that necessarily a bad model, or do we have to toss out that model to try something completely different?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it might just be like, the fact that the goal, has to do with global economy and all the students in all these different countries are competing for the same jobs. And if you have to have that one interview that I was watching was the guy was saying, the baseline, the baseline just went high, and there's definitely going to be families that um you know don't have the means to support anything extra. So I do think that there's going to be, it's hard to say though. Yeah, because like you say, our frame of reference is really only, here, and not knowing how uh public education is like in, India or um you know Ecuador is going to, it's hard to say. Um but obviously, it's going to be the same kind of thing, like a family that can offer the, more support. um the child is going to be in a better position to succeed. I did see, um yeah, I don't know, like, I know that that's the way that, everything's been moving towards this globalization, economics. So if you're going to look at education from a, in an economic, with an economic lens, um it's a necessity to have everybody kind of having you know a common experience there, um just to make it so that make it just to facilitate the workspace, um and it's tough, like, I know there was one of the other videos was the guy that was talking about the whole model for schooling is outdated and it's wrong, and but a lot of what he was suggesting was like, the students in my school, they come in and they make lunch and they go do gardening in the afternoon. And it's like, well, sounds cool, but as far as preparing the child for the workforce, there's it's kind of hard to have a lot of uh confidence in that in a school like that.
Is there anything that anyone else would like to add? I feel like we just get to a point where we're just quiet.
Yeah. I think we did pretty good.
I agree.
We could have, I mean, you could go more in depth on anything, I think, and we could talk forever, Um, but yeah, I mean, as far as, covering these questions, I think we're in good shape. So all right, you guys good to go then?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
All right. Nice talking to you again. See you next week.
See you
All
soon.
right. See you guys.